Godzilla has been around in one dimension or another since the early 1950s, and for over 40 years this legendary kaiju was instantly recognizable to those whose worlds he terrorized. An upright posture, large serrated dorsal plates, and most iconically, a devastating beam of heat. But then, in the year 1998, just outside New York City, a new gigantic creature emerged from the sea, a mutated organism the likes of which that dimension's Earth had never seen before. Since that time, many have hesitated to refer to this creature as Godzilla at all, but that is a debate for someone else to undertake. Today, we'll be traveling to that dimension, and to the brief period of time just before that gargantuan creature stalked New York, where we hope to examine its biology in great detail. But first, allow me to introduce myself. I am Dr. Felix Nebula, and to you I say, welcome aboard the dimension-hopping bioship Manta. We are entering this Earth's atmosphere now, so keep your eyes peeled, dear traveler. Though with an organism as large as this, it should be hard to miss.
Specimen located, conducting preliminary scans.
Excellent, Manta, thank you. As we've seen throughout our travels, Godzilla exists on Earth in many dimensions, each version slightly different than the others. In this dimension, it appears that the massive creature before us is the direct result of unprecedented mutation caused by nuclear radiation. Research into this creature's origins are scant at best, but many have hypothesized that during a nuclear test conducted by the French military in French Polynesia in 1968, numerous native organisms were drastically affected. This included a clutch of lizard eggs, at least one of which would hatch and eventually give rise to a massive novel species.
What kind of lizard was it?
Ah yes, good question. Unfortunately, we don't know for certain, but this version of Godzilla does bear numerous similarities to the marine iguana, on a much larger scale of course, which is a species notable for being the only extant lizard that spends much time in the ocean. So that will be my theory going forward. Anyway, following this exposure, this individual, who I will mostly refer to as Zilla from here on out, underwent drastic and widespread mutations, causing a complete restructuring not only of its morphology, but methods of reproduction, diet, and even level of intelligence. Perhaps the most obvious change is the creature's method of terrestrial movement, a complete reorientation from quadrupedal to bipedal locomotion. In fact, Zilla's stance is much more similar to that of theropod dinosaurs than any modern reptile.
Well, it does stand to reason that for a creature of this enormity, the position of non-serpentine squamate limbs would not well support its body.
That's precisely right, Manta. Put another way, lizards stand and run with their limbs well out to either side of their body. Zilla is so heavy that even supported by 4 limbs at once, this body plan would add far too much pressure to the joints, and even more so on only 2 limbs. It appears that in order to adjust for increased size and weight, Zilla's hind limbs moved to a more pillar-like structure, fully capable of supporting the creature's immense weight, while the joints adopted a vertical orientation. The forelimbs do not appear to be required for weight-bearing, allowing them to become thinner and more dexterous, while still being capable of limited locomotory support in difficult terrain.
And yet, it does seem like Godzilla is able to effectively navigate aquatic environments as well.
That's true. Its hydrodynamic body shape allows for relatively efficient swimming, at least for its size, and primarily propelled by its powerful tail. In fact, Zilla's swimming pattern reminds me of much smaller varieties of reptile. For example, much like a crocodile, it appears that Zilla undulates its tail laterally to swim, generating significant thrust through a series of sinusoidal waves that propagate from the pelvic region to the tip of the tail. Meanwhile, the limbs are held close to the body, which reduces drag. However, propulsive morphology and kinematics suggest that Godzilla is more adapted to low-speed, low-efficiency swimming, especially since Godzilla's immense size and weight increase drag, enough to limit its maximum swimming speed. But while this universe's Godzilla is an adept, if not terribly efficient swimmer, what impresses me more is how easily it can move between terrestrial and aquatic environments. You may even notice the lack of webbed feet, which one may expect to find in an aquatic creature. But much like alligators, which also spend a significant amount of time on land, webbing would actually likely hinder their terrestrial locomotion.
I have a question. Godzilla is large, of course, but unlike some other versions we've seen, it also appears relatively lean. It seems like this would present some significant biomechanical challenges.
Manta, I can always count on your astute observations, and you are correct. This particular creature's size, at over 180 feet in height, 300 feet in length, and weighing an astounding 500 tons, does seem to defy the biological rule of large terrestrial animals, which typically become stouter with increased size. However, scans have revealed some intriguing adaptations that could account for this. First, it appears that Zilla's bones exhibit a highly specialized microstructure, one that maximizes strength while minimizing weight. For example, the cortical bone, which forms the outer layer of the skeleton, appears to be composed of dense, tightly packed osteons arranged in a laminar pattern that is far more ordered than what we see in traditional terrestrial organisms. The spongy interior portions of the long bones, known as trabecular bone, also appears to exhibit an intricate lattice-like structure, which likely allows for extremely efficient load distribution and energy absorption, which would reduce the overall stress on the skeleton. Finally, the bone's organic matrix, which consists primarily of collagen fibers, exhibit a large amount of hydroxyapatite, much more densely packed and crystalline, at least compared to bones of other large vertebrates. The overall result here is a skeleton of astounding strength, even despite its relatively low total volume. But the enhanced collagen cross-linking we see in the bone matrix is apparently present in the ligaments and tendons as well, another crucial adaptation in supporting a creature of this size. Scans also indicate a higher proportion of elastin in the connective tissues, especially those around major joints. Manta, could you tell our guest about why elastin is important?
Elastin is a critical protein that imparts elasticity to connective tissues, enabling them to return to their original shape after stretching or compression. An elevated presence of elastin within ligaments and tendons enhances their capacity to store and subsequently release energy more effectively, which significantly mitigates the likelihood of injuries during dynamic, high-impact activities.
Exactly. And speaking of joints, it's pretty clear that this creature's articulating surfaces would need to be modified to withstand increased compressive forces and shear stresses. Finally, we see that the ligaments surrounding each of the joints, especially at the hip, knee, and ankle, are highly reinforced, exhibiting a structural arrangement that enhances their load-bearing capacity and resistance to stress. In short, Zilla's connective tissues are capable of withstanding the immense forces generated during locomotion, as well as the impact of powerful leaping and rapid directional changes. This is, of course, extremely important, as one documentary showed Zilla outrunning military helicopters, placing its top speed at over 250 miles per hour. Now, I believe we've spent enough time on this creature's internal structure. Zilla exhibits many external features that are not only unique, but that set it apart from the other Godzillas we've seen in other versions of Earth. Let's begin our morphological survey at the head, shall we? Indeed, Zilla's head is a striking feature, with a rectangular box-like shape and very prominent lower jaw.
That chin certainly gives it a distinctive profile.
It certainly does, though its form does follow function. Such a robust jaw structure indicates a powerful bite force, and with its lining of 5-foot teeth, Zilla is a force to be reckoned with. Inside the brain case, we see a relatively small brain, but in fact, behavioral analysis reveals a high degree of intelligence, cunning, and even tactical planning far beyond what one would expect in a non-mutated reptilian species, an aspect of its biology that no doubt aided in its remaining undetected for so many years. Moving along, we see that the head is connected to the neck, as one might expect. And like several modern species of lizard, such as iguanas and anoles, we see a fold of skin hanging just beneath the throat, commonly called a dewlap. Now, in other species, the dewlap often serves as a method of communication, even displays of courtship. But given the novel nature of this organism, I think it likely that its sole function is in thermoregulation, dissipating excess heat when necessary. Another distinctive feature you may have noticed are this creature's enormous dermal spikes, beginning at the base of the head and extending dorsally along to the tail, and reaching their maximum height just above the shoulder. These curved, almost fin-like spikes could be more accurately called osteoderms, bony projections that develop within the dermis. Once again, similar structures can be observed in some lizards and crocodilians. In Zilla's case, scans indicate that they are composed of a combination of bone and keratin. A bony core provides structural support, while a sheath of keratin provides additional strength, durability, and protection. In fact, their structure is very similar to traditional reptilian scales.
What is the purpose of these spikes, Doctor?
An excellent question, though the answer isn't immediately clear. It could be that the mutations that created Zilla enlarged the osteoderms beyond a useful function, or it could be that, like the dewlap, they serve to dissipate heat. The latter theory is certainly plausible, as a creature of this size would generate staggeringly high temperatures simply by existing, much less moving terrestrially. This may also be a reason that it seems to prefer spending time in water. But our time is short, dear traveler, and there is much more to this creature that we simply must explore, beginning with its truly bizarre method of reproduction. Now, before we proceed, there are a few things to establish about this version of Godzilla. Primarily, the well-known documentary detailing its travels through New York City made it clear that this massive reptile is capable of asexual reproduction, meaning that in order to reproduce, it does not require a mate.
How is that possible?
It's exciting, isn't it? But that's only the beginning. You see, asexual reproduction is not uncommon among organisms of Earth, though it occurs in many ways, budding, for example, or fragmentation. But in fact, in Zilla's case, what we're really seeing is called automictic parthenogenesis, a form observed in many reptile species wherein gametes are produced as in sexual reproduction, but the egg cell then fuses with other products of meiosis, restoring the full chromosome complement and resulting in offspring that, while not exact clones of the mother, are produced entirely without male genetic input. The benefit of this form of asexual reproduction is that, as opposed to apomictic parthenogenesis, which involves egg production without meiosis, thereby creating genetic clones of the mother, automictic parthenogenesis allows for some genetic diversity in the offspring. Of course, this phenomenon has not been observed in marine iguanas. The implication then is that the radiation and associated mutations that produced Godzilla fundamentally altered its reproductive system in ways we may never understand. Now, in the documentary, after obtaining a blood sample, biologist Nico Topopopoulos made the startling revelation that not only was this novel organism pregnant, but also that it was a male.
That doesn't sound quite right.
An astute observation, but the natural world is a fascinating and often surprising place. Now, it was shown that this specimen is capable of laying over 200 eggs at a time, so the fact that it was pregnant at the time of sampling is not in question, and as we've seen, parthenogenesis makes sense. But the assertion that Zilla is male is certainly unusual. You see, primarily, parthenogenesis requires ovaries in order to produce egg cells, as well as an environment for egg development, the oviducts and a cloaca adapted for laying, even if the eggs themselves don't require fertilization.
So then how could a male possess these anatomical structures? Is Zilla a hermaphrodite?
Nope. This is clear for a few reasons. First, the marine iguana, this version of Godzilla's precursor organism, never possesses both male and female reproductive organs, even in this dimension. Of course, the radiation-induced mutations have obviously led to many changes, but establishing a parallel reproductive system that is also functional would be highly unlikely. What our own scans reveal is that Zilla is indeed female, but with a complex hormonal profile that, while producing the progesterone and estrogen required to lead to a positive pregnancy test, also produces high enough androgen levels such as testosterone to be confusing. Pair that with Zilla's aggression, the dermal spikes, which may appear to be display features, and the difficulty in identifying reptilian sexes based on morphological characteristics in general, and I suppose we can forgive Dr. Papadopoulos for his misclassification.
He did his best.
If only he'd had an OmniGrab array, not only to store an organism in suspended animation, but also scan its internal anatomy for detailed analysis. But he was right about one thing, and this is where things get even more bizarre. Now, as we've established, Zilla did indeed reproduce before tragically being terminated. She laid over 200 eggs, each of which hatched after a staggeringly short gestation period, and revealed offspring that were over 9 feet tall and born hungry, making them extremely dangerous. But when pointing out the danger these offspring posed to humanity, Dr. Tadopoulos focused on the possibility of their rapid proliferation, given the fact that they were also born pregnant.
What?
That's right, and in fact, it isn't as far-fetched as it seems, although still pretty astounding, especially in a vertebrate. It appears that Zilla and her offspring exhibit a form of telescoping generations, also known as inherited pregnancy, a phenomenon previously only observed in certain invertebrates, such as aphids, which coincidentally also reproduce parthenogenetically. You see, as the embryos of Godzilla's offspring develop, their own reproductive systems mature early in the cycle and begin producing oocytes at a very accelerated rate. And just like their mother, these systems eventually begin to develop into the next generation of parthenogenetic offspring. In short, by the time Zilla's eggs hatch, the offspring already contain developing embryos within their own reproductive systems.
Does this mean that all of Zilla's offspring are female as well?
Fantastic question. Yes, it does. This is not only because, as we've seen, female anatomy is required for continued reproduction, but also because parthenogenesis in reptiles typically produces offspring with the same sex chromosomes as the mother. Of course, given the postmeiotic nature of this variety of parthenogenesis, male offspring are possible, though they would be extremely rare. And with that, dear traveler, we've covered as many aspects of Zilla's reproductive strategies as this voyage will allow. And there is still much more to discover. For example, alternate versions of Godzilla are typically known for a highly destructive beam of energy channeled through their oral cavity. Manta, do you remember what this is called? Atomic breath, that's right. You may expect to see something similar in Zilla, but in fact that is not the case. But while she may not be able to cut a building or another titan in half with a beam of concentrated radioactive energy, she does have one trick up her sleeve: heat. You see, Zilla has been known to unleash what some have called power breath, an exhalation so forceful that it can lift and move objects weighing around 2 tons, as one scene in the documentary clearly showed. This is possible for 2 reasons. First, Zilla possesses enlarged lung capacity, which I hypothesize is inherited from her original form, the marine iguana, which can stay underwater for nearly an hour at a time. Second, scans reveal exceptionally strong diaphragm and intercostal muscles, both of which can constrict rapidly and with incredible force, compressing the lungs and generating enough power to fling cars like they were made of cardboard. But that's not all. Though marine iguanas primarily consume algae, it is clear that the mutations that led to Zilla's enormous size also altered her preferred diet, and numerous occasions have established that in order to support herself and her offspring, Zilla eats fish, a lot of fish. Now, as Zilla's digestive system breaks down this marine diet, her gut flora ferments undigested proteins and other organic matter, producing flammable gases as byproducts, primarily methane and hydrogen. As part of the normal digestive process, some of these gases can accumulate in the upper portion of the stomach. Again, this is all fairly standard. What sets this organism apart is twofold. First, internal scans indicate a modified lower esophageal sphincter that appears to be capable of opening more widely than what we see in typical vertebrates. Second, her esophagus exhibits a thickened epithelium, along with a relatively high production of mucus, both of which help protect the lining of the throat from damage. And so it is that when internal conditions align, combined with sufficient external stimuli such as an impending threat, Zilla exhales forcefully, which in itself produces another fascinating phenomenon. Manta, can you define adiabatic compression? Just the definition is fine for now.
Adiabatic compression occurs when a gas is compressed quickly enough that it cannot exchange heat with its surroundings. In essence, the work done to compress the gas is converted directly into internal energy, manifesting as an increase in temperature.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
I know.
Indeed, Zilla's powerful respiratory muscles compress the air so rapidly that the energy of the compression is converted directly into heat, dramatically increasing the temperature of the expelled air, enough to distort metal. Simultaneously, Zilla may relax her esophageal sphincter slightly, which, when conditions are right, allows a mixture of methane and hydrogen to combine with the superheated air. The resulting stream of gases under immense pressure and heat creates conditions ripe for potential combustion.
Are you saying that Godzilla's power breath is really a burp?
I never thought of it like that. Kind of. In my opinion, though it is quite different than the form it usually takes, this is just one of the many things that makes this particular version of Godzilla worthy of its name. Tragically, the specimen we see before us, though she was nearly 30 years old by the time of her discovery, will meet her end shortly after landing in New York City, as well as nearly all of her offspring. Though, in fact, I have it on good authority that her lineage will continue in one way or another. But that, our dear traveler, is an expedition for another time. Our time in this dimension has come to an end. Until next time, feel free to take a brief rest. When you're ready, tap here to begin our next adventure.
Brace yourselves. Beginning ascent in 3, 2, 1.